The envelope didn't look like much. Cream-colored, slightly creased, with a return address that hadn't crossed my mind in 30 years, Law Office of Dalton and Hurst, Estate of Eleanor Mayfield. My fingers froze above the mailbox. I hadn't spoken that name out loud since I was a teenager. My grandmother. I walked inside slowly, shoes clicking against the hardwood floor of my quiet little house in Oregon. The living room sat still, sunlight slanting through the blinds like it was holding its breath. I stood by the kitchen counter, stared at the envelope. Then, finally, opened it. Inside was a smaller note, written in blue ink that had started to fade. This letter must reach Marla Grenville, and no one else. I didn't sit. I couldn't. I stood there holding that letter like it was the only thing tying the past to the present. I heard her voice, my grandmother's, as if it had been tucked between the folds. They always say the past is done. But Faulkner had it right, the past isn't dead. It's not even past. That letter opened more than just paper. It opened something I'd buried so deep, I forgot it could bleed. The scent of the letter hit me first, faint, musty. Old paper and lavender. It dragged me back, without permission. Back to the station. Back to 1985. It was hot that day. I remember the way my stuffed rabbit's ear stuck to my cheek. I was sitting on a wooden bench too big for my legs. My father paced beside a car, yelling. My mother stood still. Her hands shook. We can't do this anymore, Helen. She'll be fine with your mother. My mother didn't look at me. She looked at her feet. Then, he drove away. I cried. I remember that clearly. I cried until my chest ached and no sound came out. They said I was too young to remember. But I remember everything. People think abandonment is loud, dramatic. But it's not. It's the quiet that kills you. It's the sound of the car fading. It's the empty space in a rearview mirror. It's every birthday that follows without a card. You never really leave your childhood behind, it just changes address. Now, standing in my own kitchen, I touched the letter like it might disappear. My name looked strange in my grandmother's cursive. Like it had waited too long to be said. People always assume I have no family. I let them think that. Being a court reporter, I write down other people's truths. That's the irony, I've written thousands of pages of stranger stories. But never mine. My house reflects that silence. Muted walls. Books alphabetized. Nothing out of place. Control isn't comfort, it's survival. One box under the bed, labeled before 1985. I've never opened it. Not once. Peace doesn't come from forgetting. It comes from surviving long enough to see the truth age. I unfolded the letter fully, my thumb brushing over a daisy sticker she must have sealed it with. Inside were her words, written like she was still here beside me. Marla, this is for you alone. If you're reading this, then I'm gone, and I trust the attorneys did their job. What I have left is yours, but on one condition, it must never reach your parents. I blinked. Attached was another letter, from the lawyers. Your parents have filed an objection to the will. Of course they did. My hand trembled, just a little. Not fear. Rage, maybe. A cold, practiced kind. The kind that simmers under your ribs for decades, unnoticed, until it boils over. They left me. And now they wanted what she left me? Tucked inside the envelope was something else. A small white daisy hair clip. Plastic. A little scuffed. I hadn't seen it since I was 5. She must have kept it all this time. She didn't forget me. Memory? Funny how silence can scream when someone cuts it open. I told Mr. Dalton I'd be there. The next morning, I filled my car's tank and drove toward Portland. With each passing mile, I felt like I was folding space between two versions of myself. The child they left behind, and the woman I'd had to become. I wore my navy blue suit. The one I saved for depositions with angry attorneys. The fabric felt heavier than usual, maybe because today it wasn't just armor, it was a reminder, I wasn't there to beg. I was there to show them I'd survived. As the city skyline came into view, I heard her voice in my head again. My grandmother. Never raise your voice when the truth can speak louder. At the courthouse steps, I paused. The building loomed, all gray stone and hard edges. I wasn't afraid. Just tired of being quiet. Ready? Lena's voice snapped me back. She stood beside me, my old friend from paralegal school. She had offered to come, no questions asked. Let's get this over with, I said. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Every step echoed too loud, like the walls were listening. I found my seat, straightened my jacket, and looked straight ahead. They entered 5 minutes later. My father walked in first, head high, but his eyes darted like he didn't know where to land. My mother followed. Her makeup too perfect. Her expression too staged. They looked smaller than I remembered, but their presence still filled the room like smoke you couldn't breathe through. They sat across from me. Not once did they look me in the eye. Their attorney, a sharp-faced man in a silk tie, stood and addressed the judge. We believe the will was influenced. My client's suspect undue manipulation while Miss Grenville had exclusive access to Mrs. Mayfield during her declining health. I didn't flinch. Didn't blink. Just watched. They weren't here for money. Not really. They were here to take back something they threw away decades ago, and rewrite how the story ended. The judge spoke calmly, flipping through papers. Further evidence is required. We'll reconvene when submissions are complete. Gavel. Silence. I walked out before they could speak to me. Outside, a cluster of local reporters waited near the steps. One, a younger woman with a microphone too big for her hands, called out, "Miss Grenville, do you believe you deserve the inheritance?" I stopped. Met her eyes. Deserve is a strange word, I said. Maybe ask who earned it. Lena stayed quiet beside me. As we passed, my mother leaned in, just enough for me to hear. You've always been ungrateful. I didn't stop. But I heard it. Some people spend their whole lives leaving wounds behind. Others spend it learning not to reopen them. Back home that evening, I placed the daisy hair clip beside the stack of legal documents. The contrast hurt. One soft, innocent. The other, cold and exact. I stared at them both. Then I clipped it into my hair again. If this was the war they wanted, they'd see who I became without them. I pulled out a notebook and wrote 3 words. Evidence. Witness. Truth. No decoration. No commentary. Just what I needed to stand my ground. They weren't trying to take money. They were trying to erase what they did. But I wasn't the scared girl with a stuffed rabbit anymore. They were about to meet the woman they left behind. The courtroom was just walls and chairs, but to me, it felt like the home they never let me have. The attic door felt heavier than I remembered. My grandmother's house in Forest Grove, Oregon, quiet now, the kind of quiet that waits. I'd slipped away from legal filings and deadlines for one night, carried a box of photographs up the narrow stairs, intent on scanning them for the case. Instead, I found something I didn't expect. The scent of cedar and old dust hit me like a memory I didn't know I still had. I paused halfway up, hand on the balustrade, hearing the creak of wood that had held children's secrets, teenage fears, and adult resentments. At the top of the stairs, under a faded quilt, sat a cardboard box. On the lid, in my grandmother's neat cursive, "For Marla, only if they come back." My fingers hovered. I thought I'd escaped that house decades ago. I told myself moving on meant leaving boxes like this behind. But I hadn't counted on the truth waiting to be boxed away too. Inside, letters tied with ribbon, 2 cassette tapes still in their plastic cases, and a note. My grandmother's handwriting read, "If they ever try to take what's yours, know that you were never the one who left." The letters smelled of ink and neglect. The tapes glinted with promise. I sat on an old trunk, dust motes floating in the single bulb's halo, and unpacked them. I pulled the Walkman from its case, pressed play, and heard her voice, steady, warm, and precise. Helen and Robert knew what they were doing. They wanted the house. They wanted the legacy. They left Marla for profit, not for kindness. My stomach clenched. This wasn't just about abandonment. It was betrayal in stereo. I let letters fall to the floor around me. One from Robert to my grandmother, "We gave her to you. That should be enough." I remembered sitting on the bench at the station, rabbit in hand. That day wasn't about them being unable, it was about them choosing not to. My heart changed in that attic. I stopped seeing myself as the girl they forgot. I started seeing myself as the one they misjudged. I gathered every letter, organized them, dated them in my mind, laid them out on the dusty floorboards like pieces of a puzzle I was forced to solve. I realized the truth didn't just matter after the fact, it was my foundation. Later that night, back at the desk in the little home office I kept, I opened my laptop, transferred copies of the letters, scanned the tapes. I typed the note I wrote myself, "They didn't give me away. They tried to take what wasn't theirs." And I set the tape by my bedside, the one thing I wouldn't leave behind now. It would play when I needed strength, when the court asked harder questions, when I felt small again. I stood before the mirror in my bathroom after midnight. No tears this time. Just resolve. I practiced words I might speak at trial, not whining, not begging, just stating what was true. I asked myself, do I want revenge or recognition? I answered quietly, I want acknowledgement. I faced the reflection of the woman who wasn't supposed to have a seat at that table, and I claimed it anyway. It ended with the tape clicking off, but the word stayed, you were always enough. Even when they tried to make you small. And I listened to that voice for a long time before sleep came. The glass doors of Dalton and Hearst slid open, letting in the late morning light. I walked in holding the folder to my chest, the one filled with everything I'd dug out of the attic and everything I'd rather have never found. The lobby smelled of lemon polish and recycled air. It was the kind of place where silence carried weight, the kind that made people sit straighter. Lena was already waiting in the conference room, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back like she was preparing for battle. 2 thick binders sat in front of her. This is what we discovered, she said, voice low but steady. I took a seat, my palms pressed flat against the cool table. We opened the first binder. Rows of payments filled the pages, monthly transfers from my grandmother's account to my parents that had never once stopped, even years after they'd left me behind. They called it support, Lena said softly. I called it silence, I murmured. For a second, all I heard was the faint hum of the air conditioner and my own pulse. The numbers told a story I already knew in my gut. They'd been feeding off her loyalty while pretending to care. I checked the clock. 15 minutes until the meeting at the Mayfield boardroom back in Lexington, the company my grandmother built, the same one my parents claimed to preserve in her honor. The flight was short but heavy. By the time I stepped into that room, the smell of polished wood and old money almost made me laugh. They'd built their empire on a lie and named it legacy. My mother stood at the head of the table, poised, controlled. "Marla," she began, "we're here to resolve this peacefully. The business has carried Grandma's vision forward. You've chosen not to be part of that. Let's not make this about support younger daughter." That name, Emily, was their invention. The younger daughter they claimed to raise with Grandma's help wasn't real. It was me. I was the shadow they'd used for financial gain. I snapped a photo of the ledger and attached it to an email for Lena. Subject line, "Let's talk about surrogate heirs." I spoke into my phone recorder, voice steady, "When you build your legacy on someone else's back, history will hear it." I could almost hear my grandmother laugh softly in the dark. The next day I sat in Erdman Park, coffee cooling in my hands, watching leaves tumble into the pond. I twisted the daisy clip in my hair, my quiet reminder of her. The city noise around me blurred. I thought about what they'd said, about me not being part of the business. Funny thing was, their entire business stood on the foundation of what they stole from me. I took a long breath. The anger was still there, but it had changed shape. It wasn't fire anymore, it was ice. Focused, contained, sharp. I opened my notebook, wrote out tomorrow's plan, review evidence, file the supplement, prepare for hearing. But under that, I wrote one line in all caps, "I am done being silent." They'd always laughed when I said I'd fight. They thought I'd fold like before. Tomorrow, they'd see how quiet the storm before the thunder can be. The courthouse hallway felt colder than it should have been. Every step I took sounded like a clock ticking down to something I couldn't delay anymore. My shoes clicked on the marble floor, steady, even. Across the corridor, I saw them, my parents, standing with their lawyer. They spoke in low tones, their faces carefully composed. But when I glanced their way, their eyes shifted. They couldn't hold mine. Lena leaned close as we reached the courtroom doors. "You're not reacting," she whispered. "That's already power." I nodded, though my pulse drummed in my ears. Inside my purse, I carried the same old envelope from my grandmother. I didn't bring it as evidence. I brought it to remember who I was standing for. I caught a glimpse of a quote carved into the courthouse wall, "Justice is truth in action." I repeated it in my head until it stopped feeling like a quote and started feeling like armor. When the bailiff called our case, I stood. My parents sat opposite me, perfectly still. My mother adjusted her pearl earring. My father straightened his tie. Performance had always been their favorite sport. Their lawyer began first, painting a picture of struggle and reconciliation. He talked about family hardship, emotional distance, and miscommunication. It was rehearsed down to the tone of his sighs. When it was my turn, I didn't bother with sympathy. I just told the truth. They left. Not because they had to, but because I didn't fit their future, I said. And now that the inheritance is real, so is their memory of me. No raised voice. No tremor. Just calm precision. The judge's expression didn't change, but I saw her pen stop moving. That was enough. Lena rose next, sliding the folder onto the table. "Your Honor, these are letters written by the deceased, confirming ongoing payments made to the plaintiffs, payments labeled as support, despite no evidence of actual care or visitation." The judge adjusted her glasses, scanning the documents. I reached into my bag and placed a small tape recorder on the table. We also have a short audio statement from Mrs. Mayfield. Lena pressed play. My grandmother's voice filled the courtroom, steady and unshaken. If they ever return, they're not here for you, they're here for what I left behind. The air shifted. You could hear the discomfort ripple across the room. My parents' lawyer tried to object, but the judge raised a hand. Overruled. Continue. I looked directly at them. My mother's eyes widened, panic flickering behind the mask. My father's jaw locked like he was holding something in shame, maybe, though I doubted it. I leaned forward slightly, voice low but sharp. You walked away once. Walk away again, or I'll show the court everything you've done. No one moved. The silence felt heavier than shouting. For once, the power was mine. Lena cleared her throat, resuming. If the estate's funds were misrepresented, Your Honor, we're prepared to file for an investigation into elder abuse and fraudulent transfer of assets. The judge looked at my parents. I'd recommend you take this warning seriously. We'll adjourn until I decide whether this proceeds to mediation or litigation. The gavel hit once. Just once, but it sounded like a verdict. When we stepped out of the courtroom, my legs felt like they'd carried the weight of years, not miles. My parents stood a few yards away. They didn't speak at first. Then my mother walked toward me. Her perfume, the same as I remembered, clung to the air between us. You're destroying the family, she said softly, almost pleading. I shook my head. You destroyed it when you left me behind. Her eyes glistened. She reached for my hand. I didn't let her touch me. Not this time. I'd waited years for her to reach out, but not like this. Not with a lie still sitting between us. You think this makes you right? She whispered. I don't need to think it, I said. I proved it. I turned away before she could answer. I didn't want another speech about forgiveness that didn't include accountability. Outside, the Oregon air hit my face, crisp and clean. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. For years, silence had been my way of keeping peace. But peace without truth isn't peace at all, it's surrender. And I was done surrendering. As I walked toward the parking lot, I glanced back once. She stood there, her face blank, her hands still half raised like she didn't know whether to call after me or not. She looked at me like a stranger. And for the first time, I looked back and agreed. I woke to my phone flashing red notifications, an avalanche of headlines I didn't need but couldn't ignore. By the time I dragged myself out of bed, the local news was already playing a segment, estranged daughter manipulates will, parents seek justice. My parents' lawyer had fed the machine and it was grinding. I felt shock first, cold, sharp, and then a furnace lit under my spine. But I didn't break. Not this time. I had seen what betrayal looked like. This was just loud. I rolled out of bed, pulled on a plain gray blouse, and zoomed into Lena. I said, they want noise. I'll give them silence that cuts. Later that afternoon, I sat under bright cue lighting in a studio back room, daisy clip pinned to my hair like a badge. Lena settled beside me, whispering, we respond, but not emotionally. Strategically. I pressed play on the cassette tape from Grandma's box one more time, the one where she said, if they ever return, they're not here for you, they're here for what I left behind. The words echoed. I breathed deeply, waited until the red light turned on, and walked into the spotlight. I told the interviewer calmly, my grandmother taught me that truth doesn't need defense, only patience. Then, they abandoned me when I was 2. The only thing I've taken is their silence. I laid out a ledger, a scanned page showing trust funds diverted years before her death. The interviewer's jaw dropped. Live on air. I closed with, "You can't sue the truth, it will outlive you." And just like that, the narrative flipped. By evening, the tide turned. Social feeds surged in my favor. The station ran a correction, financial inconsistencies under investigation. My parents disappeared from view, like criminals without alibis. I arrived home to find an envelope under my door, no return address. Inside, bank records with my father's forged signature on a trust withdrawal. Anonymously sent. Someone inside their world was helping me. Now it was personal. I met Lena in her office at dusk. "This is more than inheritance fraud," she said quietly. "This is criminal." I smiled once. Good. I'm done going back. I slipped the daisy clip out of my hair and placed it gently on the desk. Not sentimentality, purpose. I walked out into the crisp night air and thought of Grandma's house, the attic box, the letters, the tape. I'd carried all that into this fight without realizing it. Tonight I carried the clip too. I let the wind carry away what I couldn't change. Tomorrow I would carry my evidence forward. The next time we met in court, they wouldn't be facing the scared girl, they'd be facing the reckoning. I walked through the grand foyer of the estate like a soldier entering enemy territory. Everything gleamed, the chandelier, the polished floors, the fake smiles. They called it a tribute to Eleanor, but I knew it was a show. They weren't here to remember her. They were here to erase me quietly. My mother took the mic first. "Please welcome Marla Grenville," she said, eyes sweeping the room with practiced grace. "Our guest of honor." Her lips barely curled, but the tone dripped. Not pride, sarcasm. I found my place at the long table and sat down slowly. The card read, Ms. Mayfield Jones. Wrong name. Not even an accident, intentional erasure. It landed like a slap, right in front of the whole room. I didn't say a word. Not yet. I stared at the nameplate, hands still, back straight. I thought of Eleanor's voice, "They may silence the truth, but they cannot erase your existence." I folded that into my spine like steel and waited. As the evening dragged, I smiled when necessary. Nodded at empty compliments. But inside, I was planning. Counting faces. Noting who laughed too hard, who whispered when I passed. Every piece mattered now. After dinner, I slipped out the side door into the garden, needed to breathe without the scent of lies. That's where I found Rosa, her eyes wide, shoulders tense. "Marla," she whispered, handing me a crumpled envelope. It was left on my desk. No signature. Inside, one sentence. "Stop now or you'll regret it." I stared at the ink like it was a smudge on my soul. Rosa swallowed. It came from someone inside. They don't want the story going further. I could have panicked. Could have backed off. But fear didn't live here anymore. I looked her in the eye. "Then I'll shine the light." When I stepped back inside, the band had just finished. People still lingered at the dessert table, wine in hand. I walked straight to the center of the room. No microphone. Just my voice. This isn't about tribute. This is about the truth you've buried. Heads turned. I handed out copies, pages of board minutes, signatures, bank withdrawals. Proof that Eleanor's estate had been gutted under the pretense of family unity. My mother's face drained white. Tinsley stiffened, clutching her wine like a lifeline. You can't build your empire on someone else's loss and call it legacy. And then I left. Just walked out. No apology. No explanation. Just truth, left behind like a flame. Back in Portland that night, I didn't sleep. I organized the files, one document at a time, labeling every record. The hotel room buzzed with silence, anticipation louder than any noise. Around midnight, a knock. Rosa. She held up a flash drive. Caught him. Last night. He signed it. We plugged it in, grainy footage, but clear enough, my father, signing a backdated trust amendment. He didn't know the camera saw everything. We sat in silence for a moment. Then Lena's voice on speaker, "We file now." Sealed affidavit. This is the fulcrum. I nodded, whispering as I stared out the window, lights stretching across the city. They tipped the scale. But they didn't know I held the fulcrum. At 2 a.m., we filed the motion. Evidence loaded. Statement drafted. It was no longer about inheritance. This was about justice. And the next day? The world wouldn't just learn a name. It would learn a history. The morning light hit the Portland Federal Building like a mirror. Cold, unblinking, honest. I walked up those marble steps in a navy blazer that fit like armor, every step deliberate. My palms were dry, but my chest felt like it carried thunder. Across the aisle inside, my parents sat side by side, calm on the outside, rotting underneath. The cameras weren't here this time, just the truth, stripped bare. The bailiff's voice called, "All rise." Judge Nadine Slocum entered, her robe flowing, her tone clipped and steady. "We're ready when counsel is." I looked at my parents once, not for validation but for confirmation. They were still pretending this was about money. It never was. The first evidence rolled out, the tape of the forged trust, the withdrawal, the handwriting that betrayed them. I kept my hands folded. The air thickened with every second of playback. My mother's jaw tightened, my father shifted in his chair. The judge's voice cut through the silence. "Proceed." When the video ended, my parents' attorney stood. "Your Honor, this recording is taken out of context." I didn't move, didn't blink. Context didn't matter. The signature wasn't hers. Judge Slocum looked directly at my mother. "Did you or did you not consult the estate's financial officer before authorizing this withdrawal?" The question hung there like a verdict before the verdict. My mother hesitated, half a second too long. I believed we had full authority." The judge's brow furrowed. That pause changed the air in the room. It wasn't mine anymore, it was hers. During recess, Lena leaned in. "She's leaning toward us," she whispered. She used to work with Eleanor. Elder law advocacy. The universe tilted. Not favoritism, just alignment. The truth was finding its way back. When court resumed, Judge Slocum addressed the room. "I am familiar with Mrs. Brackett's reputation. She built her life protecting those who could no longer speak for themselves. It appears her voice continues today through her granddaughter. For a heartbeat, I forgot to breathe." My father tried to interject, voice rising. "Your Honor, our daughter has misunderstood the nature of these transactions." The judge cut him off, calm but firm. "Then let the record show she is being heard now." The jury scribbled faster. The sound of their pens felt louder than any argument. Hours later, after closing remarks and an ocean of waiting, the deliberation began. The minutes stretched like hours. I sat alone at the plaintiff's table, staring at the daisy clip pinned to my bag. That little thing had survived everything: courtrooms, accusations, the weight of silence. It didn't shine anymore, but it didn't need to. The door opened. Everyone stood. The foreperson handed over the verdict. The judge read it slowly, clearly. In favor of the defendant, Ms. Marla Grenville. The court recognizes her rightful inheritance and orders investigation into fraudulent activity concerning the Mayfield estate. For a second, no one moved. Then I exhaled. My mother's head dropped. My father didn't speak, just gave a small nod, like he finally saw the inevitable. Not love. Not remorse. Just recognition. Lena gripped my shoulder. "It's done," she said quietly. Outside, the air was bright, raw, almost painful. Reporters swarmed the steps, microphones extended like weapons, but I didn't flinch. One asked, "Ms. Grenville, what would you say this victory means to you?" I looked straight into the lens and said, "The past didn't leave me behind. It left me a purpose." I walked down those steps, feeling the wind lift my hair, feeling Eleanor in every breath. Vindication wasn't revenge. It was peace with teeth, earned, not given. As the courthouse doors closed behind me, I finally understood the fight was over. Now came the real work of living. The house still smelled like her. Cedar. Lemon polish. The kind of clean that doesn't come from scrubbing, it comes from care. I stepped inside slowly, leaving the front door open behind me. No rush. No, and she didn't want to leave a trail for them to follow. Instead, she asked me to invest her estate, not in monuments or family names, but in something living, a shelter. A place for daughters like me. For those who were forgotten before they had a chance to be remembered. I didn't cry because I was hurt. I cried because I felt seen. I whispered to the empty house, "You saw me." Even when they didn't. Later that evening, back home, I was stirring a pot of lentil soup when Monica walked in with 2 bottles of red. Friends trickled in one by one, people who'd stood by me during the hearings, through the mud and the lies. I set the table for 7. Laughter replaced the sound of gavels. For the first time in years, I had a full table. At the center, I placed a dusty bottle, Eleanor's last blackberry wine. We'd never opened it. Never had a reason to. I raised my glass. To families, the ones we earn, not just inherit. The clink of glasses was soft but certain. Monica leaned over and said, "You're not just surviving anymore. You're shaping something." I thought of my childhood room. The one they left behind without a second glance. It didn't feel like mine anymore. It felt like a story someone else lived. 2 weeks later, I stood in front of City Council, paperwork in hand. The Brackett House would be a reality. Local organizations signed on. Donations came in, some small, some surprising. A woman from Florida wrote, "Your story helped me leave a man who told me my voice was too loud." A podcast invited me to speak. Topic: Inheritance and Identity. I said, "Your past is not your prophecy." The host nodded, tears in her eyes. I meant it. We don't always get the family we deserve, but we can become the family others need. That night, long after everyone had gone, dishes washed, lights dimmed, I sat at the kitchen table with a blank sheet of paper. And just before I turned off the lights, I wrote one more letter, this time, addressed to the girl I used to be.